Hi, and welcome back to Developmental Psychology, Week 3. Chapter 5 is going to talk about cognitive development during the first 3 years. Let's jump into what the learning objectives are for this chapter. Identify 6 approaches to the study of cognitive development. Describe how infants learn and remember. Discuss infant assessment measures and how intelligence is predicted. Summarize and evaluate Piaget's theory of cognitive development, mostly focusing on his first stage of development, which was the sensory motor. Explain how infants process information and begin to understand the characteristics of the physical world, and describe language development in infancy. The 6 approaches of studying cognitive development are behaviorist approach, psychometric approach, Piaget approach, information processing approach, cognitive neuroscience approach, and social contextual approach. The behaviorist approach proposes 2 major mechanisms of learning. Classical condition, which is learning that occurs when a person learns to respond to a stimulus that originally did not elicit that response. Operant conditioning focuses on how the consequences of a behavior affect the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. The psychometric approach looks at what's described as intelligent behavior, behavior that is goal-oriented and adaptive. IQ, intelligence quotient tests, are psychometric tests that measure intelligence by comparing a test taker's performance with standardized norms. Testing infants and toddlers. Researchers test infant functioning and compare infants' performance to what an average baby can do at a certain age. The Bayley scales of infant and toddler development assess children from 1 month to 3.5 years in 5 areas: cognitive, language, motor, social emotional, and adaptive. Scores represent developmental quotients that help parents plan for a child's needs. The home observation for measurement of the environment measures how the home influences child's cognitive growth. A number of variables are important: the number of books in the home, the presence of educational playthings, parental involvement in children's play, and parental responsiveness. Early intervention is a systematic process of providing services to help families meet young children's developmental needs. They involve full-day, year-round early education, medical care and services, and family education on child development. The Piagetian approach talks about the substages of the sensory motor stage. The sensory motor stage is the first stage of Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. In this stage, infants learn through senses and motor activity organized as cognitive schemes, which are organized patterns of thought and behavior used in particular situations. Cognitive growth comes through circular reactions, in which an infant learns to reproduce events originally discovered by chance. Substages of the sensory motor stage include reflexes, primary circular, secondary circular, coordinate secondary circular, tertiary, and mental combinations. In this chart, you can see the stage aligned with the age in months with a description of what the child would be able to do during that substage. Imitation becomes increasingly valuable in the first year of life as babies try new skills. Visible imitation involves imitation with body parts that babies can see. At about 9 months, babies engage in invisible imitation of body parts that babies cannot see. Piaget believed children under 18 months could not engage in deferred imitation. That is, imitation after the passage of time. Research now shows infants engage in deferred imitation at 6 to 9 months of age. Object concept. Object permanence is Piaget's term for understanding that a person or object still exists when it's out of sight. At about 4 months, infants look for something they dropped, and if they cannot see it, they act like it no longer exists. Between 12 and 18 months, infants will search in the last place an object was seen. At 18 to 24 months, toddlers will look for an object even if they do not see it hidden. Symbolic development is learning to interpret symbols, which are intentionally representations of reality, is an essential task of childhood. For example, pictorial competence is the ability to understand the nature of pictures. Prior to 15 months of age, infants use their hands to explore pictures as if they were objects. By age 2, children understand that a picture is both an object and a symbol. Although toddlers tend to enjoy books, most toddlers are very familiar with electronic devices. Table computers and cell phones offer an interesting contrast. Young children will treat a screen like a photograph. American Academy of Pediatrics recommends limited use of media in children younger than 24 months except for live video chatting. Toddlers sometimes try to sit in a chair much too small for them, and this is an example of scale error, a momentary misperception of the relative size of objects. A toy chair is both an object and a symbol for a class of things, such as chairs. This dual representation hypothesis proposes that children under age 3 have difficulty grasping spatial relationships because of the need to keep more than one mental representation in mind at the same time. Infants' information processing efficiency is measured through habituation and dishabituation, and this is the information processing approach to cognitive development. Habituation is a type of learning in which familiarity with a stimulus reduces, slows, or stops a response. Dishabituation is an increase in responsiveness after presentation of a new stimulus. Infants spend more time looking at some objects than others, indicating their visual preferences. Babies less than 2 days old prefer new sights to familiar sights. Newborns distinguish between a familiar stimulus and unfamiliar stimulus when shown both at the same time. This visual recognition memory implies a rudimentary representational ability that exists at birth or very soon after and quickly becomes more efficient. Neonates or newborns will look at a source of a sound, indicating they associate hearing and sight. A more sophisticated ability is cross-modal transfer, the ability to use information gained by one sense to guide another, such as negotiating a dark room by feel versus sight. Information processing as a predictor of intelligence. 4 core cognitive domains are associated with later intelligence quotient, including attention, processing speed, memory, and representation competence, or for example, that cross-modal transfer example we gave. Research shows that performance on these tasks in infancy is related to performance on these tasks in toddlerhood, as well as performance on IQ tests at 11 years of age. Dividing the world into meaningful categories is vital to thinking about objects or concepts in their relationships, forming the foundation of language, reasoning, and problem solving. Infants first categorize on the basis of perceptual features such as shape and color. By 12 to 14 months, their categories become conceptual. They become based on real-world knowledge of a function. For example, a zebra-striped chair is furniture, not an animal. Infants as young as 4.5 months are able to understand simple causality. However, only infants who have had practice playing with a Velcro-covered ball and Velcro mittens were able to do so. By 6 months, the ability is more robust and does not require training. So at 4.5 months, it sounds like there has to be exposure to that situation in the first place before they show that they can understand it. After 6 months, the ability seems to be more there, even if that exposure to the pre-training did not occur. In this figure, we talk about object permanence and kind of show how early infants are able to show that, demonstrate that. In the violation of expectations experiment, 3.5-month-olds watch a short carrot and then a tall carrot slide along a track and then disappear behind a screen and then reappear. After they become accustomed to seeing these habituation events, the opaque screen was replaced with another opaque screen with a large notch at the top for the test events. The short carrot did not appear in the notch when passing behind the screen. The tall carrot, which should have appeared in the notch, also did not. The babies looked longer at the tall than the short carrot event, suggesting they were surprised that the tall carrot did not appear in the notch. So it speaks to prediction in the fact that they were expecting something to happen. The violation of expectance paradigm was also used to test babies' understanding of numbers. 5-month-old babies watched Mickey Mouse dolls added or subtracted behind a screen. When the screen was lifted, babies looked longer at the wrong answers. Cognitive neuroscience is an approach that involves using brain scans to provide physical evidence of two separate long-term memory systems. Implicit memory refers to unconscious recall, generally of habits and skills. It is also referred to as procedural memory. Explicit memory is conscious or intentional recollection of facts, names, and events. In early infancy, memories are fleeting. As the hippocampus matures in the temporal lobes, longer-lasting memories are possible. The prefrontal cortex develops the capacity for working memory, which is short-term storage of information that the brain is actively processing. Working memory appears relatively late in development and may be responsible for the slow development of object permanence. Social interactions promote cognitive competence. Guided participation refers to mutual interactions with adults that help structure children's activities, bridging the gap between a child's understanding and an adult's. There are cultural differences. For example, in the U.S., children and parents engage in more play activities. In Guatemalan, children and parents engage in more work activities. Language refers to a communication system based on words and grammar. Once children know words, they can use them to represent objects and actions. Children display a typical sequence of linguistic milestones. The forerunner to linguistic speech is prelinguistic speech, which consists of cooing and babbling, then accidental imitation and deliberate imitation of sounds without understanding their meaning. Theories of language acquisition. Is linguistic ability learned or inborn? Behaviorists believe language is learned through reinforcement and imitation. Noam Chomsky argued for nativism, specifically that people have an inborn capacity for language acquisition he referred to as a language acquisition device. Most developmental scientists maintain that language acquisition is an intertwining of nature and nurture, so essentially of genetics and environment. Table 2 gives us a very detailed explanation of age in months on the left, development on the right. This age ranges birth to 3 years, and it gives examples of language milestones. Some examples: an example at 10 to 12 age of months, no longer can discriminate sounds not in own language. An example at 20 months uses fewer gestures. And an example at 36 months says up to 1,000 words, 80% intelligible, and makes some mistakes in syntax, so in conventions. You can see, if you think about the beginning of that chart to the end of it, the growth is enormous and almost incredible when you think about what is happening in the first 3 years. Early vocalization. Crying is a newborn's first means of communication. Between 6 weeks and 3 months, babies start cooing when they are happy, such as squealing and gurgling. Babbling is repeating consonant vowel strings like da, da, da that appears between 6 and 10 months and is often mistaken for a baby's first word. Language sounds and structures. Phonemes are the smallest units of sound in speech. Every language has its own unique phonology, or system of sounds that are used in the production of speech. Exposure to language occurs either prenatally or postnatally. At about 6 months, hearing babies have learned to recognize phonemes used in their native language. Learning gestures helps babies learn to talk. Some examples of those are conventional social gestures like waving bye or nodding your head to indicate yes or no. Representational gestures such as holding an empty cup to the mouth to indicate thirst. Lastly, a symbolic gesture like blowing to mean hot or sniffing to indicate flower. The average baby says a first word between 10 and 14 months, initiating linguistic speech, the verbal expression that conveys meaning. A single word used to convey a complete thought is a hollow phrase. Receptive vocabulary refers to words an infant understands, and expressive vocabulary is an infant's repertoire of spoken words. The next important linguistic breakthrough comes when a toddler puts 2 words together to express an idea, such as dolly, fall. This telegraphic speech consists of only a few essential words. Around 20 to 30 months, children become increasingly aware of the communicative purpose of speech and of whether their words are being understood. Characteristics of early speech. Understanding grammar precedes the use of it, so application cannot happen until knowledge is acquired. Syntax provides rules of language and gives us information about the order of words. An underextension of word meaning is using words in too narrow of a category, such as doggy, only referring to the family pet and not all dogs. An overextension is using words too broadly, such as referring to all men as Gampa. Young children also over-regularize rules, such as saying, I drawed that, instead of I drew that. Variations in language development. Deaf babies learn sign language in the same fashion as hearing infants learn speech. Typically sign their first word at a slightly younger age, 8 months, than hearing babies say their first word. Bilingual children tend to have more advanced nonverbal executive control skills. Bilingual children often use elements of both language, sometimes in the same utterance, called code mixing or code switching. Lower socioeconomic status has led to educational disparities between school-age children and their higher socioeconomic status peers. Orange language skill development begins at home, and higher SES families can invest more time and resources while lower SES families are at a disadvantage. Children of bilingual families with low SES status face additional struggles. Tremendous brain growth is occurring during this time. Brain development during the early month is linked with language development. A newborn's cries are controlled by the brain stem and pons, the primitive parts of the brain. Repetitive babbling may emerge with maturation of parts of the motor cortex. In toddlers with large vocabularies, brain activation focuses on the left temporal and parietal lobes. Language is processed primarily in the left hemisphere of the brain. Language is a social act. Children who grow up without normal social contact do not develop language normally. When babies begin to talk, parents or caregivers can boost vocabulary development by repeating their first words and pronouncing them correctly. Research has documented early and emerging persistent differences in language development for children between lower and higher socioeconomic groups. Child-directed speech is a form of speech used in talking to babies or toddlers. It includes slow, simplified speech, a high-pitched tone, exaggerated vowel sounds, short words and sentences, and much repetition. It can also be referred to as parentese or motherese. Books as socialization tools. Reading to children can improve their language skills and cognitive abilities. It can encourage their creativity, and it can promote social and moral development.